My name's Corette and I'm a freelance graphic designer and I live in Bradley Stoke.
And my name's Jono, I'm a civil servant and I live in Bradley Stoke with Corette, who is my wife.
So I was actually born in South Africa and I lived there with my parents and my brother. And it was an interesting upbringing because obviously it's very different from England. I think one of the biggest things that defined our life was the fact that we lived in a very Christian culture. Everybody that I knew went to church and had affiliations with church, and every Sunday was about going to church. That was pretty much my upbringing as far as I knew up until the age of 7. And then my dad got a job in England and we decided to relocate abroad to come and live in Bristol. As a 7-year-old, having to process the recent loss of a grandparent, having to travel thousands of miles, leaving behind culture, language, even that kind of safety bubble of church security. It was quite a difficult transition.
I'm originally from Australia. I was born in Sydney, but my parents, when I was born, were already preparing to be missionaries, and so when I was 6 months old, we went across to Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, where we lived till I was 2, so I don't really have many memories of that time. And then we moved down to Johannesburg, so I was actually living quite close to Corette without any knowledge of it for a couple of years, because we stayed in Johannesburg until the end of 1996, and then the task my parents were doing with the Australian Baptist Missionary Society came to an end, and we went back to Sydney. So got there just before Christmas '96, and then stayed in Australia until 2003 with my dad doing various jobs, but he ended up doing a couple of part-time jobs, one with a Bible college and one as an accountant, which wasn't great fun for the family. So we got offered a job in England at Cliff College, which is up in the Peak District. And so he accepted that, and the whole family relocated to England in 2003 when I was 13. To be honest, I can't remember a point before that where I'd ever considered myself not a Christian. You know, I'd grown up as a mish kid, as they say, and, you know, church all through my life had been a big part of it, doing Sunday school, doing Sunday services. My dad had worked as a pastor for a little bit in Sydney before he went into teaching at the Bible college. When I came here to the UK, I was sort of just getting to the point where you think about it a bit more.
My experience was very similar to Jono's. I had always known that Jesus was the Son of God and that he came on earth to die on the cross for us. And so that was just reality as I understood it. And I think that was the same for you.
Exactly. There was never a point where I had doubts. You know, I didn't have a big conversion moment, you know, St. Paul on the road to Damascus or whatever. The strongest thing for me was Cliff College, where my dad was working, would have a festival, they called it, every year around the second bank holiday in May. And I remember being at some of the youth work events at that, and I felt a really strong urge saying, actually, if you believe this, you need to get baptized. When I was 14, in the November of 2004, I got baptized, so I sort of acted on it and went up and stood publicly and said, I'm a Christian. And I think you say you had a similar...
Yeah, so I mean, you know, having spoken about coming from a very Christian culture in South Africa, and then you come to England where, you know, you encounter a lot of people who don't believe in God and don't understand Christianity for what it really is. And so in a weird way, that was kind of a good opportunity, because then I had to say, well, these people don't believe in it. Why don't they believe in it? And then I had to reassess, am I just believing this because my parents have told me to believe it? Or am I believing this because actually I have genuine evidence to make it real to myself? So for me as well, you know, around about the age of 14 and 15, we had amazing youth workers at our church who really helped us to kind of understand that, who let us ask any questions that we wanted. I think I was about 15 when I decided, right, okay, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to live for God because he is so amazing. And then I decided, if I'm going to do that, I need to make that something that everybody I know knows about, which is why you get baptized. It's a public declaration of your faith and a choice to live for God and not for yourself anymore.
Through my school years and growing up, I had a very secure faith. I was always very public with my friends at school that I was a Christian. You know, I said I went to Christian Union on a Monday, and that was something that some of them thought was a bit strange. And so I don't think I really suffered any trials in my faith until I left that situation and went away to university. My first term at university was tough. I was struggling to find a church to settle into. I was going around a lot of them. A lot of the weeks I was just feeling really tired and didn't really want to get up on a Sunday morning to go and try a new church. Fortunately for me, a guy in the college next door to mine got hold of me and he said, Johnny, you say to me you're a Christian, but you're not acting like one at the moment. So why don't you come and do a Christianity Explored course with me and remember why? And so I did that with him. It's like, I don't need to do this, I'm a Christian. But I went along with him anyway. And I felt really convicted about how I'd been slipping away. And he got me then plugged into the church he was going to, which had a 7 o'clock in the evening service, which was great. Because if I felt tired and sleepy on a Sunday morning, I still had no excuse for missing the...
For me, I think, the darkness really and the challenges of life really set in when I was about 15 years old. So, I'd gotten baptized and, life was great. But at the same time, my mental health started to deteriorate. And I think it was a combination of all sorts of things, whether that be the pressure from school or just kind of teenage angst, whatever you want to call it. But there was definitely more of a serious mental health thing going on. Suddenly I found that I couldn't concentrate very well. I'd have to read a page like 10 times before I had any idea what it said. And I just got worse and worse. But kind of there were some consistencies in my life the whole time. So one of the big things was that Thursday night at church, we'd go to youth group and I'd go with some friends from school. And that was always something that I really looked forward to, even in, the dark times. I knew that this is a place where I was safe, where I'd be around other people that I trusted and who were real and who genuinely cared about me. And it was actually one of the youth workers who was one of the first people that I spoke to about how I was struggling with my mental health. That was pivotal for me in terms of trying to come out the other side of that.
After university, I had things a lot tougher, and I had my own mental health challenges at that point. I was working as a teacher in Crawley, and I'd thought I was going to try and do a PhD, but I didn't have the funds for it, so I thought I'll try and do it part-time. I was really struggling with balancing the demands of working full-time as a teacher with studying, and my institution weren't particularly understanding, I think, of part-time students and their requirements anyway, which didn't help. Yeah, I had a real breakdown at that point. And I remember being at church on a Sunday evening. I sat down for the sermon and I didn't really hear a word the preacher said because I was just like having a panic attack or something I didn't really understand at the time. And I went home and it was about 9 o'clock and I called the pastor and he came straight round and he sat with me till about 11 p.m. I think it was. And then the next morning he came round and had breakfast with me and took me to see the doctor. The church family really rallied round me. One of the deacons used to meet up with me after work once a week just to have coffee and talk things through because he'd had his own experiences that he shared with me during that time. It was a time of real emotional ups and downs for me. And it ended with me leaving the teaching job. And while I'd been in Crawley, my parents had moved from Nottingham, where they'd been when I finished university, down to Bristol. And I didn't have a job to go to. So I came to Bristol to live with them while I sort of thought about my future. And I didn't know anybody here. I didn't have a church here. It was sort of just like, this is where I'm going to end up, and I don't know what's happening now. And I was still struggling with my mental health, but I was really trusting in God.
Strangely enough, I'd been having a very similar experience to him because I'd also left university and not really knowing exactly what I wanted to do. All that I had in my heart was kind of this passion to live for God. I started looking at doing church ministry jobs or going into full-time church work, maybe even becoming a missionary. I kept pushing loads of doors and praying about it and really trying to find what is God's purpose for me, what is God's plan for me. And there was constant kind of frustration because no matter where I went or what I looked at, just something wasn't quite right. The doors were being shut or there was roadblocks in the way and all sorts of complications. Again, it was people from church, friends that I had and who I was serving in ministry with, like doing the youth group together and stuff like that, who were supporting me. If I needed to talk about stuff, they were there. If I just needed to be distracted from the darkness, then they were there to talk to me about it. And I think, again, like Jono said, you reach this point where all of the plans that you had for your life are coming to nothing. And so you have that choice of like, right, okay, do I continue trusting God or am I going to kind of give up? God was so good in making sure that no matter how much I was struggling, there was always somebody there to lift me up, somebody there to carry me.
I had a look online and found that Bradley Stoke Evangelical was basically within walking distance of where I was going to be living. It was like a month after I moved to Bristol that I actually finally made it here for the first time. And I remember then coming outside after the service to get a coffee and seeing a few people who looked about my age and getting into a talk, and we were talking about video games and American football and stuff like that. And I think somewhere in there is where I first said hi to Corette.
I think we kind of bonded over mutual interests, like gaming and that sort of stuff. And you just kind of became a little bit more involved in some friends, and we kind of saw each other when we were doing socials, when we were doing lunches.
Yeah.
And then obviously the more we realised how many interests we shared, the more time we ended up spending together.
Our friend TJ got very ill about 2 years back now. Seriously intensive care ill. And we were going into the hospital a lot to try and see her. Also so that her husband could get some time to look after their kids and things like that, and just be there and be good friends. We ended up spending a lot more time together, I think just one-on-one, than we had previously during that time. And I think that's sort of where we moved from just being friends to maybe having more interest in each other.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
Our friends were definitely playing matchmakers at the time.
Yes.
Because they'd obviously realised how dynamics had changed between us, as from going just friends to liking each other a little bit more.
Yeah, especially after TJ was not better, but well enough to be out of hospital. I was getting a lot of messages saying, "So Corette, what do you think about her?" And
yeah, and then I just kind of bit the bullet and said, "Oh, I've got some cinema tickets. Do you want to come to the cinema with me?" And
I've been trying to work up the courage. I'm terrible at big questions. But I've been trying to work up the courage to ask her out for a little while, and she ended up asking me out. So, but I did ask the biggest question. I bought her a birthday present, and then I hid inside the birthday present a little card asking her to marry me.
You said yes.
I did.
No.
So after John had proposed, the next big step obviously is to pick a date for when you get married. And we were umming and ahhing about this a little bit.
I specifically wanted February 29, so I only have to remember the anniversary every 4 years.
Go for a leap year
But
wedding.
that day was booked out, so we ended up with the week later.
Yeah, so we ended up getting the date for the 7th of March.
There may have been mention from our friends that, you've got to get married before you turn 30. And if we'd let it go any later, I would have been 30.
So, okay, that was it. The 7th of March, that is the day. It looks quite nice on paper and everything, and we booked it in. So we did all of the planning and everything that you normally do for weddings.
Although obviously in the build-up, we'd started to hear on the news and stuff from the new year, basically about coronavirus, and it didn't even have the name back then. I think it was just coronavirus. I know at work people were talking about, we might have to work from home for a couple of weeks or something. It's going to happen. And by the time we got to a week before the wedding, there was real talk about whether businesses were going to send people to work from home and things like that. And even like us having about 100 people together felt like, this might be, people might not want to come.
And family coming from Australia and South Africa and stuff.
We had family flying, and it was, but lockdown didn't happen until afterwards. About a week after, I think, was when, so we went away straight away on honeymoon, and while we were watching the news there, things were closing down. And my first day back at work afterwards was literally to go into the office, get my laptop, and then go straight back home again.
Thinking about it, actually, we couldn't have timed it any perfectly, because we literally had time to get married, have a honeymoon, and then come home, move in together, do a quick trip to IKEA for some essential furniture and home pieces, get that settled in. And I think it was literally the day after we went to IKEA that lockdown was officially announced.
Yeah, that was the last day IKEA were open. Then we went and got all our furniture. So everybody said to us that, it must be crazy getting married and then being locked in together. It's going to be sort of sink or swim, isn't it? Well, if that's the case, I think swim is definitely the way we found it. People seem to think that it's going to be really hard, but I think we found it really nice to almost have an enforced slightly, it's not a honeymoon because you're not away, but a longer time to get to be together just as a couple without people intruding. Because
we haven't lived together before we got married, it was very much a dramatic change to the routine of life. We were very fortunate in that, all of the things that we loved doing together and the games that we were playing and stuff, and just binge watching Netflix and things like that, was really well suited to us, just slowly learning to kind of integrate life together in that way.
So I think for me the biggest takeaway is that God is in control. going through my life story here and thinking about it, looking back, I can just see all these places where I felt myself out of control, and then I see the results and I see that God was in control. So I think about when I had my mental health issues and my breakdown, and I think about the verse where Joseph says to his brothers that you intended it for evil, but God used it for good. And looking back, I can see actually, God brought me out of that situation, and he didn't let me fall too far, and it hurt, but it's what brought me to Bristol. It's what helped me meet Corette when I was a 14-year-old and was first making the public commitment to Christ that maybe I didn't understand fully, and it's sort of going through the next years of my life have taught me to learn that God has a plan for my life, and that although I don't always understand it, I can always trust that his ultimate intention for me is good because he loves me.